So what was your first experience with writing? When did you break into knowing that DJ was going to be a writer?
Well, I don't. Those are two different questions. I think my first experience with writing was way, way back when. My grandmother went to high school with Shel Silverstein,
Sure.
and so she wanted. So I would always my grandfather would read all the poem books and stuff when I
Mhm.
was like homesick and whatnot. So I really loved the power of those poems and the double meanings and the triple meanings and the
Right.
multi. But then I was on tour with a show for years, and I would get to talk to band kids
Hmm.
in cities all over the country and eventually overseas. And there was a lot of common ground, even though there was a lot of diversity in the audiences. And so I wrote down a lot of those like common fun things about kids in band and turned them into poems, like Shel
Hmm.
Silverstein type poems, and that became one of my first like self-published books way back when, called Band Nerds Poetry from the 13th Chair Trombone Player. Because my degree was in music education, so I
Okay.
was big in the band world. And that was my first time writing, and I really loved the impact of it, and people really related to it. And then I decided to get into picture books and try
Yeah.
that.
You do the illustrations as well?
For some of them, I didn't start out that way. The iPad actually really unlocked a lot of like uh, options for me because I didn't have to
Yeah.
like waste paper and pens, and I didn't really know what I was doing.
Yeah.
So my first book I illustrated was all just like shapes and eyebrows and faces
Hmm.
and silly things. Um, but now I've just practiced, took some lessons from my friends, you know that are illustrators and whatnot. So now I've illustrated a couple of them, but most of the time a publisher will bring in a big gun for it.
Yeah. I was doing a little research, and you have a slew of books. How many have you put out?
I think officially published either traditionally or self about 24. So
Wow. That's a considerable number of books.
my biggest release was released in the middle of COVID, and
Hmm.
we thought we were going to sell millions of copies of this book called A Thousand No's, and we sold a ton, but not anywhere close to a million. And so like you just you think things are going to go one way and they'll
Yeah.
go another, but um there's a philosophical argument I have for that, and it actually came from uh you initially contacted me about my interaction with John Hughes, and one of the things that he had shared with me is, he had asked me, I met him when I was working in retail, and he was so kind, and I spent like a half hour with him. I was probably should have been working, but I wasn't. And I had numerous conversations with him over the course of a year before he passed away. And one of the things he asked me is like, DJ, what are you trying to do? Assuming I didn't
Yeah.
want to do retail. And I said, well, I'm trying to be a writer. And he said, well, have you written anything? And I said, well, yeah. And he goes, then you're a writer. And
Yep.
he really talked about you don't need people's permission to do that. And that really inspired me to like go after it with the self-publishing at a time
Yeah.
when
Yep.
self-publishing had a stigma and all of that. And so I really love the place where I'm at right now, where I have traditional books, but if they're not picked up, I've built in the infrastructure. I can absolutely release a book my own, and
Yeah.
it doesn't have any less value than a book that was done because somebody has officially blessed me with being an author or something like that. What I know is that if you were to ask me if I could write children's books before I started writing children's
Right.
books, I might have answered no.
Right.
And so it kind of goes back to the bravery of getting rid of that fear of starting to do it. There is innate talent for sure.
Hmm.
And I think it comes down to speed. Like, I don't feel like I can write children's books as fast as maybe like some brilliant ones like, Mo Willems or, some of the other wonderful children's books authors that just throw out brilliant books every 2 weeks or something like that. But I don't think that has like an inherent negative value, like the time it takes you to do it.
Yeah.
Um, so for example, if I wanted, there's times when I've sat down and I'm like, I want to write a YA novel, and I had this idea for it, and I'll sit down
Mhm.
for it, and it's just terrible when I spit it out. But then I'll revisit it, 2 months later, and I'll be like, oh, it's not too bad, and then I'll refine it, and I'll get better, and it really made me understand how some authors like take years to write, a novel. And I don't think that means they're less talented than somebody that can
No,
do it
no.
quicker.
I,
But there is an inherent belief that you have to have. I
yeah.
think that's like in yourself. There's a difference between passion and belief. And the reality to me is belief is knowing the inevitable is going to happen while applying wisdom to the future. So like
Wow.
I know this is going to happen. And